Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, July 12th, 2022. Time for another hearing, if not yet. Pretty soon, at 1 p.m., I think, start time. Waiting until after the show. Very generous of them over at the January 6th committee. Today, as Greg prepared us yesterday, is American warlords on under the microscope. I don't know. They're not on trial yet. Some of them are on trial elsewhere, but not what's happening here in the 1-6 committee here. They're having the hearings here, which is not only considerate to wait until they're off the air, we're off the air, but I don't even have to travel to go to see them. They're just going to do them right here in my house. I didn't really think I had enough room for that, but it can be a small and intimate affair. All right, yes, well, as I said, America's warlords under the microscope today. The Oath Keepers, militia, the Proud Boys Fight Club thing. I don't know what the hell you would call it. I mean, it's a militia in the sense that they love to walk around on the street and intimidate people and beat people up. It's not so much an army cosplay thing as it is a street gang cosplay thing, except that they will probably actually punch you in the face. So not that much cosplay either. But there's a costume that goes along with it, and it's becoming a fun and popular event on the right-wing side. They love to dress identically and menace people. That's what's going on. Today they'll be examining their role, and, it should prove enlightening, let's say. So we'll all watch together. I won't be able to come back tomorrow and tell you what I think about it, at least not live, and I don't really know when I'm going to be able to squeeze in recording between now and today. But you never know. Something might inspire me to sit right back down and record something. Maybe it'll be the hearings. I don't know. I'm a little overwhelmed. I don't know if I'm going to be able to watch the hearings all the way through this afternoon. I may have to work in a nap. It's an early day tomorrow, not just a travel day, but an early day. All right, lots to catch up on. By the way, I am hoping that will catch on if you want to use the same terminology referring to. I saw Empty Wheel earlier today tweeting that it would be difficult and perhaps somewhat misleading to refer to Oath Keepers and Proud Boys both as white supremacist militias because, one, that's not really necessarily any primary component of whatever you might call their ideology necessarily. And two, they love to work in the fact that they do have occasional minority members. It amounts to very much the same thing. But as you know, let's see. Marcy puts it this way. Pro tip for those prepping to learn about Oath Keeper and Proud Boy militia conspiracies that DOJ has been pursuing since January 6th. 2 of the indicted Oath Keepers are black. And Enrique Tarrio, is Afro-Cuban. He's one of the leaders of the Proud Boys. And there are several other indicted Hispanics, which is to say that calling them white supremacist militias isn't going to get you very far. Or at least they've planned their rebuttal to your calling them that. Now, they will admit to being, as they say, Western chauvinist in the Proud Boy tradition. And I don't know what the Oath Keepers say about themselves. But I don't think that they're primarily tied to white supremacy, though a lot of it comes through. That's true. But I've just been referring to them as American warlords, which I think they would love to be thought of that way. So, I don't want to encourage them or anything. But I do think that it's important to sort of recognize that that's kind of the role that they're taking on. And it's one of those things that we don't think of as being American. It's not an American thing to do, warlordism. Though I'm sure if it was going to be done, those guys would wish that they were the ones who would be doing it. But then I feel the same way. If we're going to have warlords, let it be me, I guess. I suppose, right? I mean, it's not like a cherished role or something I aspire to or anything, but I guess if that's the direction we're going, you want to be on the top of the food chain if you can. And that's what makes them so dangerous. But they would really relish that, and they love the idea of it's, it's counterintuitive, counter-cultural, really, for them. It's interesting. They have sort of their own version of the counter-cultural revolution. But they love to shock and dismay regular mainstream Americans. It's not as much a part of the Oath Keeper ethos, if there is one, as it is the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys seem out to shock and dismay normies, as they sometimes like to refer to them, or that's what we think they like to use. But they love to get on TV. Gavin McInnes certainly used to love to get on TV and say, political violence is great. We should have more of it. I was thinking about that today as I noticed that, let me put Marcy's tweet, look at this. The new TweetDeck thing that I downloaded doesn't really let you, it doesn't open windows of, when you isolate a tweet and put it aside for later. When you want to open it up, I used to click on in TweetDeck and open it up in a browser window so that I could then park the park the URL in. All it did is give me the Twitter home thing. All right, I'm going to look for Marcy's tweet, but it used to open up in a browser window that I could mark it for Pocket, and I see that things are now going to get in the way of that. So, okay, what a fun way of starting the day. All right, here we are. There's the empty wheel tweet. I happen to notice also people tweeting around, and I'll have to go look for the thing here. Clip of Laura Ingraham, and she's essentially, what was the thing that she was grabbing? Oh, yeah, that's right. She was playing Pete Buttigieg and his quote, although I guess she wasn't actually playing his quote. He, I guess, was asked about the Kavanaugh thing, and I don't know. I don't even know what the answer was. Unfortunately, I can't play it from Ingram either because she will distort what's going on. But I think that Pete Buttigieg had said that, look, when you're a public figure and a member of the Supreme Court and you do something like this and you rule in a way that is opposed by some, 60 to 70% of Americans by overruling Roe v. Wade, you're going to have to expect some protest and pushback. And Laura Ingraham basically spun that into what the Chiron here says. Mayor Pete, political violence is actually good. And, of course, he's not saying violence is actually good. He's saying protest is actually to be expected, and it's not really a value judgment on it at all. But he might even say that political protest is good. But this is the sort of thing that Gavin McInnes, if confronted with on television, would say, yes, political violence actually is good, and we ought to encourage more of it. And the more we encourage it, the more they'll be intimidated and will win things, and they'll go our way. It doesn't have to be that every day is filled with political violence, but just enough to make the other side decide that it's not worth fighting and to submit. That was the Gavin McInnes approach, and he knew it would infuriate. And people would say, "How dare you?" And un-American or whatever. And he would say, either no, you're wrong, or what do I care, or I'm Canadian. I don't know what his answer was, but it would roll off his back because he was programmed for that. That was the role that he chose for himself, to infuriate the normies. And I must say that I do sometimes wish that we had that ability too. And you don't want to, I know, you don't want to sink to their level and everything, but sometimes I wonder what would happen. Probably nothing really good, but I do still wonder what it would take. Like, suppose you're caught by that, or suppose I were just to tweet that out, take that screen grab. Mayor Pete, political violence is actually good, and just send out, you know what, it is good, and just see what happens. And then, of course, there would be right-wing, probably Proud Boys supporters who would tweet that around and say, "Look at this leftist. He says that he admits it. He says that political violence actually is good." And then you would say, "Oh, I'm actually just quoting Gavin McInnes, who's one of the original founders of the Proud Boys," and that would all be lost, and the nuance would escape them all somehow for some reason. And that too is part of the game. They know that very well. And they don't want you to be able to steal their power to walk around saying political violence is good and upset the other side. So they will upset you by pretending not to understand the nuance of it, if you even decide to go that route. And you don't even need to decide to go that route. They'll simply hang it on you anyway. I mean, Mayor Pete here has said nothing about political violence, and yet that's the line. He says political violence is good. So you don't have to do it to be accused of it. So you might as well just jump in with both feet, is what I'm saying. Anyway, I don't know. I'm not certain how to approach that. Let's see. Many other fun things to share with you today. Much more about the hearings coming up and what they mean. I didn't really put aside the Laura Ingraham thing, I guess. But I guess I will, just so that you know what I'm talking about. And in case you did your best to seal yourself off hermetically from the Laura Ingraham world. And I wouldn't blame you for that. Okay, let's see. Other things I need to share with you. I did want to kind of finish that. There's more in the news. Mike Flynn is in trouble again. Again. I think that's like 3 agains on that one. I just said 2, but it's again. Because he's a spy, and he just couldn't help himself and just continued spying forever. But, oh, look at that. Okay, well, that explains it. Thank you for the fantastic feature in The Guardian, which tells you up front when an article you're looking at is old. And I missed that until just now. This article is more than 1 year old. And I was going to read it like it was new. Michael Flynn ignored official warnings about receiving foreign payments. Although I think I will note it for the record because I don't recall noting it when it was new. But I just think that's sort of an interesting addition to his profile. I didn't realize that was the case either then or now. And I think the article was, now I understand. Murray Wass was the author of the piece. And I think it's jogging my memory. He must have been tweeting something about Flynn recently. And I think it might have been his proclivity for ignoring warnings. In case you don't remember the origin of my pinned tweet, which has been for, I don't know, what are we on here? 16, 17, 18, and 20. So 6+ years. It's been my pinned tweet that Mike Flynn is a spy. And the thing that motivated me to do that was the story, or the version of the story I heard of his dismissal from the Defense Intelligence Agency, which boiled down to the idea that the Defense Intelligence Agency offices in the Pentagon was sort of like a no-leak zone, one of those places where they say, to avoid creating opportunities for leaks and espionage, we are not going to have the DIA key offices be internet connected. You can, of course, have computers there to do work, non-networked work, but it's best for everyone if we don't have networked computers that can't be accessed remotely. And so, fine, great. But that when he was chief of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Flynn just really, really wanted to have an internet connection on his computers there, and I don't really even know how you managed to do it, but basically broke through all the protocols and, in fact, did bring internet access online in DIA, and, I think that there were some leaks and some breaches of security there, and he was held largely responsible for them and I guess dismissed in the Obama administration. And that turned him forever from a crazy person who would probably stay out of politics to a crazy person who would enter politics. And that's the origin story of Mike Flynn. Anyway, ignoring all warnings because basically, generally speaking, he's the kind of guy who thinks the warnings don't apply to him. I understand the reasoning of the warnings. He won't even necessarily say it's a bad warning. I'm so intelligent and I see things at such high level that you don't really have to apply those things to me. I'm going to do things my own way. And that's sort of at the heart of what Mike Flynn is all about. And this article made me think the same thing. Even though it's a year old, Michael Flynn ignored official warnings about receiving foreign payments. Trump's former national security advisor was warned about taking foreign money as far back as 2014. The Pentagon's Inspector General has found undermining claims of political persecution. So I guess I don't really want to spend the time reading such an old article, but and it looks like I can't. As a matter of fact, I guess they paywall their stuff after a while. But anyway, just part of his character. He's the kind of guy who takes these warnings and chucks them out and says, not of interest to me. I'm too smart to be trapped by these things. I can read the article if I look at the pocket version. And, well, you know, it tells you pretty much what you need to know about this. Just sort of, I'll run over the first couple of paragraphs to give you an idea. The Defense Department Inspector General has uncovered evidence that Michael Flynn accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from foreign interests and governments, despite repeated warnings by the DOD and the Justice Department that his conduct might be illegal. The Guardian can reveal. Now I remember why I put it aside, too, when Murray Wass talked about it. We just read a story a couple days ago about Flynn being back in trouble again, and that the Department of, I guess the DOD Inspector General was seeking to recoup some amount of money, a small percentage anyway, of the amount of money that Flynn took from overseas interests. And I thought this was an interesting companion piece that, like, they said, if you do this event, you're going to be in violation, and then we're going to have to take this money back from you, and you'll be in legal trouble. And he went and took it anyway. So let's see. So despite repeated warnings, after the retired general pleaded guilty in 2017 to federal criminal charges that he had lied to the FBI during the investigation of Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election, then President Donald Trump, Flynn, and their supporters claimed Flynn was the victim of political persecution. And, of course, that prosecution, they insisted, without evidence, was the result of a vast conspiracy by the FBI and U.S. intelligence agencies to sabotage Trump's presidential campaign and presidency. Trump ends up pardoning Flynn in the final days of his presidency, but while pleading guilty in 2017, Flynn also admitted to committing another crime related to his acceptance of hundreds of thousands of dollars from the governments of Turkey and elsewhere without registering with the Justice Department as an agent of a foreign government, which was required by law. Now, or rather a year ago, according to people familiar with the confidential findings of the recently completed, 1 year ago completed, IG investigation, The Guardian can reveal Flynn was warned years earlier that his acceptance of foreign money and his not registering as a foreign agent would likely be illegal. Moreover, Flynn's conduct occurred while he was a private citizen long before Trump became president. Taken together, this appears to constitute powerful new, now 1 year old, evidence discrediting Trump and Flynn's claim of political persecution by those opposed to Trump's agenda. So there you go. Just a little fun backgrounder to add to your understanding of things. This was from April of 2021, this piece. All right, and I guess I just thought it was relevant because he had landed himself in the headlines again as the subject of a lawsuit in which the governments would seek to recoup some portion of his emoluments. Okay, speaking of the militias under the microscope today, the warlords, what reminded me of the fact that I wanted to, spread the word that they ought to be regarded as warlords, was a Just Security article from the other day by Rachel Kleinfeld. I thought this was kind of interesting that the pictures included, that was used to illustrate this thing, included the faces of Alan West, himself a warlord leader, Murdery Trader Green, pictured here with members of the 3%er militia, and Roger Stone, also pictured being escorted probably around the January 6th timeline, by the Oath Keepers with their faces covered back in the day. Anyway, this news, this approach, and I guess the headline made me think warlordism, and I wanted to revive that terminology. The GOP's militia problem, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and lessons from abroad. There are many lessons. And now I'm thinking there's a theme to be uncovered here. The January 6th Select Committee hearings have been framed as an effort aimed at accountability and posterity, but their findings are at least as important to the future. Well, yes, I should say so. The committee's disclosure that Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson tried to hand-deliver a slate of fake electors to Vice President Pence, that Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs asked Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers to decertify their state electors the morning of January 6th, and that some Republican members of Congress sought pardons from then-President Trump for their roles are further signals that co-conspirators in the schemes to thwart the Democratic choice for president remain in power. They are not the only ones maintaining and seeking power. Former President Donald Trump is eyeing a return in 2024. The Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, militias that the committee has highlighted for their roles as ringleaders of the violence that day, did not see their strength ebb after January 6th. On the contrary, violence, first used as a political tool and now partially mainstreamed, has spread. The events on January 6th are not past, they are prelude. Okay, sounds heavy, right? As a researcher on violence and democracy around the world, this is our author here, Rachel Kleinfeld, I have studied party-linked militia groups for years. That's what triggered the warlord thought in my mind. In countries like Iraq, Nigeria, Lebanon, and Colombia, places with warlords, politicians outsource violence to specialists in the trade, just as they hire consultants for robocalls and direct mail. And I mean, it is as open and as transparent as all of that in some cases. In the past, Googling these terms brought up countries just escaping from conflict or descending into it. Now, the United States, where militias have been embraced by GOP leaders at the national, state, and local level, as I discuss in detail below, appears among the early search results. Trump's flirtation with militia groups began well before the events recounted on January 6th. The Oath Keepers assembled to, quote, protect the polls after then-candidate Trump's claim of potential fraud in 2016. Multiple militia groups mobilized in response to Trump's statements surrounding his inauguration and in response to his calls for more border security. The Oath Keepers provided security to Trump campaign rallies and events in Texas, Minnesota, Washington, D.C., and elsewhere at regular intervals between 2016 and 2020. So not even getting close to January 6th yet, but they're providing security like in an official capacity. After Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State of Georgia, refused to find those 11,780 votes, he faced death threats that increased after Trump declared him an enemy of the people. The family went into hiding following multiple threats, including the appearance of out-of-state Oath Keepers at their home. Remember, that's terrible. Chalk is the worst thing in the world, but Oath Keepers are A-OK with their guns. Speaker Bowers testified that at least one of the crowd members protesting viciously at his home while his daughter lay inside, dying, by the way, wore 3%er insignia. On January 5th, photographs showed Oath Keepers wearing all-access passes. They said all access on them. They made them themselves, but all-access passes on lanyards as they escorted Roger Stone to a speech he gave by the Supreme Court. And on January 6th, militias not only breached the Capitol, Stone appeared to use Oath Keeper militia members as part of his personal security outfit that morning. The January 6th testimony to date has focused on Trump and the ways he has encouraged and instrumentalized militia members, but support for vigilante violence has spread to other parts of the Republican Party. In 2017, the Portland branch of the Republican Party, that's linked here. What do they mean by Portland branch? I mean, I guess Portland, Oregon, but the Portland area Republican Party organization, voted to allow militia groups, including members of the Oath Keepers and Three Percenters, to act as security at their public events, like Greg mentioned, so like the Hells Angels, essentially. They get legitimized by using them as security. A Colorado County GOP has also hired militia groups for security. In Michigan's Grand Traverse, is that right? Traverse County, local officials at a Zoom-based public meeting were asked to denounce the Proud Boys after the insurrection. Instead, the county commission's vice chair stepped off screen and returned with a rifle. Sure, why not? In Texas, Alan West, then chair of the Republican Party, offered an oath to, quote, swear in militia members at a Stop the Steal rally in November of 2020 and posed with armed militia members just days after the January 6th riot, appeared alongside other Republican state politicians at a rally with the leader of the Oath Keepers in March after the latter was under investigation for his involvement in the January 6th attack. This winter, a militia-backed recall election ousted the Shasta County, California Board of Supervisors. The new leaders, of course, now owe their positions to the militia. Isn't that fantastic? So they're militia-backed public officials that know very well that they're only public officials by virtue of the action of the militias. Nothing dangerous about that, right? New leaders owe their positions to the militia's support. In Arizona, Mark Fincham, a sitting member of the House, the state house there, trumpets his membership in the Oath Keeper militia. The chairman of Wyoming's GOP, engaged in a fierce battle against Liz Cheney, the January 6th Select Committee Vice Chair, is a member of the Oath Keepers. Keep it all in mind.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Shall we continue with the reading here of the situation behind the examination at the January 6th Committee of America's would-be warlords? We left off by noting that the many places where these militia members are moving into elected office or directly supporting the election, or being directly responsible for the election of elected officials who owe their positions to the militia. But it reminded me, as we were reading, that the chairman of Wyoming's GOP party engaged in a fierce battle against Liz Cheney, is a member himself of the Oath Keepers, and it reminded me that over the weekend there was another story that I don't think I've gotten a chance to discuss yet, but the running in, where was this? The Herald Tribune, the running of an op-ed piece under the title here, and according to the screen grabs of Attacking Proud Boys Does a Disservice to Caring School Parents. Melissa Radovich gets the byline for writing this horribly headlined piece, and Just another screen grab of the text that I guess was particularly offensive to people. It highlighted here. When I think of the Proud Boys, I think of fathers, business owners, and veterans, which is like totally insane view of what... I mean, there are some Proud Boys who are fathers, I'm sure. There are some who might even be business owners and veterans, but not what most people think of when they think of Proud Boys. Yeah, punch me until I can name 5 breakfast cereals. Yeah, very dad thing to do, veteran thing to do, certainly true. These fathers have spoken at many school board meetings. They are concerned about the direction that their local schools are heading in, and I commend them for coming to school board meetings. By the way, I happen to think this is pretty incredible. I mean, I don't know whether this was strategy, like let's run straight at the biggest weakness of the Proud Boys among the American public, or whether they have no idea that this represents a weakness for the Proud Boys. But back in the Virginia elections that resulted in Glenn Youngkin's election, allegedly, I noted this trend here that we ought to be, pointing out that, look, the Proud Boys they're growing beyond anybody's control, which I'm sure they think is a fantastic thing, but that that's the place, the interface with the normies, where I think things begin to break down for them in terms of their acceptability. It's generally speaking, the normies say, well, we're just not for mob violence generally, so we're not particularly favorably inclined to these people, but they're not our problem. They show up and they fight with Antifa people in places like Portland and New York and D.C. and maybe a few other locations. I don't know, Madison, Wisconsin? I don't know, maybe. But they're not something that's going to be a part of my daily life. But when Proud Boys start showing up, when they make it difficult for normal parents to feel safe going to PTA bake sales and whatnot, that's when they'll run into fairly serious PR problems. And the idea that it's a good thing and a normal thing for people to show up in paramilitary uniform or, cosplay uniform even, like these Proud Boys do, and make people annoyed and uncomfortable, even if not physically intimidated, by being at a PTA meeting and bringing up crap from Fox News, I think is a pretty serious mistake. But then I brought the article up not so much for its substance as for the fact that others are now finally getting around to pointing out. I didn't know this. I don't keep track of these things, but thankfully other people are around who do, pointing out, hey, not only was the article poorly written and should never have run in a major newspaper because it says things as dumb as, when I think of the Proud Boys, I think of fathers, business owners, and veterans, but that the author of the article fails to disclose that she's married to a member of the Proud Boys. Apparently true. Thanks to Brian Schott, who tweets as Shot Happens. Get it? Shot Happens. And he's a blue-checked kind of a fellow out there from, let's see, he's a writer about politics and extremism for the St. Louis Salt Lake Tribune, SL. I'm like, oh, St. Louis? No, Salt Lake. Tribune is Salt Lake. So, neglecting to point out that, the reason you think of Proud Boys as fathers and veterans and whatever is you're married to one of them, and he might be a father. But okay, well, I just thought that was interesting. And I also thought it was interesting that she wasn't proud enough to reveal that in the article, that she's married to one of the Proud Boys. I thought they were so proud. They're so very rarely actually proud of themselves and what they do. But again, connection to people in the mainstream, some of which are not entirely obvious until you pry it out of them. Now back to just security. The Proud Boys are also infiltrating local Republican parties. Greg keeps bringing this up. In Miami-Dade County, a number of Proud Boys appear to have entered parts of the party hierarchy, bringing their violent intimidation with them. In Nevada, the director of the state's Republican Party has been accused of recruiting Proud Boys to take part in party leadership votes and intimidate candidates running from the more traditional Republican wing of the party in Clark County, which contains Las Vegas, of course, and is by far the largest county in Nevada. Pretty much controls Nevada politics. And that's interesting. You just recruit Proud Boys Why don't you come to our Republican meetings? Oh, that stuff's boring. I hate that stuff. There's all this dumb political infighting. Oh, yes, but aren't you the people that love to at least say that you're not embarrassed to tell people that you're there to punch people, that political violence is good and to upset the apple cart in that respect? Oh, yeah, well, we can turn these things into fun meetings for you anyway. What if you went and you were enabled by us to physically intimidate people, maybe even get to throw a few punches, and then you win all the votes because you're intimidating people, and you could just take control. And for once, I don't like elective politics. The people in it are boring. They don't fight like we do. Well, what if you were those people, or you backed people who you liked, and you put them in office by fighting? Well, that would be particularly exciting to them. So I guess it has worked. Let's see, where will we leave off? Oh, yes. The faction's violent threats forced the Clark County Republicans to hire extra security, hold events in gun-free zones such as schools, and ultimately to cancel multiple meetings due to security fears. And what do? You say, we have to hire extra security to keep the Proud Boys from coming in and ruining the event here by physically intimidating everybody, so we can't get a fair vote on anything, even though they say they're here to protect the vote, which is ironic. But even worse, if they manage to take over and you want to fight back and reclaim the party against them, you can't even really do so in a safe environment because now they've won and the new security guards at the meeting are Proud Boys. That's not so great. Proud Boys, of course, also accosted Representative Dan Crenshaw, though maybe he had it coming to him too, and his staff at the GOPS convention in Texas this month, chanting a term for him popularized by Tucker Carlson, of course, and I think this month would be last month. This article is actually from July 6th, but I have a feeling she wrote that section of it maybe when we were maybe at the end of June. All right, so let's see. Did we just leave off with Dan Crenshaw's event? Yes. Far from reducing violence, the 2020 election and its aftermath heralded a step change in the mainstream acceptance of violence as a political tool. The FBI arrested Michigan gubernatorial candidate Ryan Kelly this month after he egged on the January 6th crowd in Washington, D.C. with cries of, "Come on, let's go. This is it. This is war, baby." Kelly met this winter with poll workers in Michigan alongside Michigan State Senate candidate Mike Detmer, who suggested in response to concerns about future election fraud, "Be prepared to lock and load." Rawr, I said the terminology. Lock and load. Rawr. If you ask what we can do, show up armed. It's fine. They go ahead and say it. You keep thinking that it'll be the end for a Democratic candidate or Democratic candidate supporters to say things like this, and maybe it would be. Maybe it would be, but it would only be that way if they got acorned out of existence and Democrats declined to back them. But, we probably would decline to back them because we don't like political violence. They appear to love it, and that puts us in an imbalance. So, Senate candidate Eric Greitens, of course, already facing domestic violence and sexual assault allegations from different women, now has a video showing the former Navy SEAL armed and hunting, quote, rhinos, Republicans in name only, you know them. He encourages his supporters to do the same, given that there is no bag or tag limit, more terminology, rawr, as he states, to kill other human beings. Okay. Violent groups that get involved in politics in other countries, this is where it becomes really interesting, follow a common path that I detail in my last book. At first, politicians recruit experts in violence and intimidation to use those tools as a campaign tactic. Later, those violent leaders run for office or take political roles directly, cutting out the political middlemen. Usually what they want is power and impunity so that they can make money from more lucrative criminal activities, though sometimes they simply want power for its own sake. To understand where this can lead, and this is an interesting fact I did not know, 11 of India's current national legislators, 11 of India's current national legislators face open cases for murder. So, in case you were ever wondering, well, how far could Trump really go with that? I could shoot a guy on Fifth Avenue and not lose a vote. Well, I don't know about not losing any voters, but it doesn't mean you could lose office, apparently. Not in this environment, either in the United States or around the world. There's 11 currently sitting members of India's parliament who face open cases against them for murder. 30 have attempted murder charges, and 10 serving legislators have been convicted of such serious crimes, a doubling from 10 years ago. So you got sitting legislators convicted of crimes as serious as murder and attempted murder, I guess. And, but hey, they're elected, so they get to show up and come to work and legislate for you and do things like decide whether or not it will be against the law for their friends to do more of that to you if you oppose it. Proud Boys chairman Enrique Tarrio, mentioned earlier this morning, based in Miami, began amassing a criminal record at the age of 20. That's rather late for lifetime criminals, but it's unclear whether their entrance into Miami politics is at the behest of others or is the beginning of going into business for themselves. In Nevada, it appears more clear that the Proud Boys are still at the first stage, being recruited by unscrupulous political actors who are using their violence to amass more power for themselves. Why would a faction of Republicans still in power or running for office at the federal, state, and local level make common cause with violent criminals? Because violence and intimidation are already bolstering their power. Intimidation is being successfully used to silence opposition. Representative Gonzalez, I guess was he mentioned earlier? I don't think we identified who Gonzalez is. Representative Gonzalez was one of 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Trump. After threats to his wife and young children, he decided not to run for re-election. That's a way of getting rid of him. Seems to have worked. When 13 House Republicans voted to support greater funding for highways, bridges, and other infrastructure, totally normal thing to do, even for a Republican, right? Their colleague, murdery Trader Green, publicized their phone numbers. A number admitted to receiving threats afterward, suggesting that a new tactic for whipping future votes and compelling members of Congress to vote against the wishes of their districts has been discovered. Indeed, Representative Peter Mayer, right? Or is that we decided how his name was being pronounced? Mayer or Meyer? M-E-I-E-R. I've done this like 100 times already. Wrote about a Republican colleague who voted against certifying the presidential election out of fear for his family's safety. We have heard this story, but it's remarkable every time I hear it. And Moocher, I don't know, said as well that some of his colleagues who voted to impeach Trump have since traveled with armed escorts out of fear for their safety, altering their routines and getting body armor, which he noted is a reimbursable purchase for members of Congress. Isn't that nice? Americans may feel that these incidents of political violence are, quote, high politics that they can avoid if they steer clear of the political arena. But no, they're coming to your PTA meeting, unfortunately. That feeling is widespread in countries I have studied where political violence grows to dangerous levels. It is always a false hope. In the United States, it is already far more dangerous to exercise freedom of speech than in the recent past. Driving cars into civilians used to be a tactic favored by overseas terrorists. It had been recorded just twice in the United States before James Alex Fields Jr. murdered Heather Heyer by driving into a crowd of counter-protesters at the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally. Yet, from George Floyd's murder on May 25, 2020, through September 30th, 2021, just over a year, at least 139 drivers drove their cars into protests across America, injuring 100, sometimes severely, and killing 4. I knew that it was happening a lot, and that there were state legislatures alleging that they were passing laws to legalize it, but I didn't know that the number had risen to 139 incidents. Threats from members of Congress have risen against members of threats from members of Congress, if you include murdery Trader Green, have risen as well. But threats against members of Congress have risen tenfold in the 5 years since Trump became president. White supremacist activity has risen 12-fold in the same period. For blacks, Asians, women, and others, hate crimes have increased dramatically over the last 5 years, and mass shooters, of course, emboldened by political rhetoric, have struck ordinary citizens going on about their ordinary lives from El Paso to Buffalo. Homicide may seem disconnected for normal people, they normally think so, from political violence. But in fact, a historical study of homicide from America's founding discovered that it was tightly correlated with distrust in fellow Americans and in the government. The Pew Foundation has found that trust is at near historic lows after years of conspiracy mongering. In 2020, murder had the highest one-year jump since 1905, and possibly in all of recorded U.S. history. Homicide rose all over the country, in cities and in rural areas, but increased most sharply in red states. How odd. The United States is the only country in the world to have experienced a sharp rise in homicide during the coronavirus, and it rose in the U.S. while nearly every form of nonviolent crime fell. Nor is it only adults. Children often enact what their parents only say, acting out the cultural zeitgeist. Between 2016 and 2017, before the mental health challenges caused by the coronavirus in response, physical attacks with a weapon in schools nearly doubled. International terrorism expert Ari Perlinger has found that in Israel and Germany, domestic terrorists are emboldened when they believe that politicians encourage violence or that authorities will tolerate it from their side of the political spectrum. In the Select Committee hearings, we hear a Proud Boys leader say that then President Trump's comment to stand back and stand by tripled their membership. Since the election, the Proud Boys have rallied around anti-critical race theory and COVID masking protests, using mainstream causes to boost their membership. They and other extremist groups became increasingly public at conservative rallies, taking part in nearly half of all armed demonstrations in 2021. Stuart Rhodes, leader of the Oath Keepers, has stated that he expected pardons for those arrested at the January 6th insurrection and money for their legal defense. Violence is overwhelmingly concentrated on the right. But as Justice Brett Kavanaugh has discovered, once violence has been legitimized as a tool of politics, no one is safe. Violence begets violence. Once its use mainstreams, moderates who espouse nonviolence appear anemic and unable to offer protection to their side. I think I just experienced that problem earlier. The middle weakens while violence eventually takes on a rhythm of reprisal far removed from the original causes. The full accounting of January 6th is finally being unveiled to the public, but its reverberations continue. Globally, militias commit more political violence than any other group, including governments and insurgents. We might hope the committee's hearings will be a cause for a national conversation as well as an internal conversation and soul-searching within the GOP. I love saying that, even though it's very awkward. Even if Trump passes from the scene, and gosh, I hope he does, the embrace of violence and intimidation as a political tactic by a faction of the GOP will cause violence of all types to arise against all Americans. And, that's pretty scary. And there were about 10 things that they reminded me of along the way, and I have forgotten most, if not all of them. But perhaps visiting in Pocket again around... oh, yes, right. There were a couple other items that I put aside for discussion later on. But maybe revisiting Pocket will remind me what I wanted to dig out but I'm not certain that I will successfully be able to do that. All right, well, we'll move on to a couple of other things. Oh, yeah, maybe that's a good follow-up there, too. And add a couple other tidbits to the news roundup. How about this one? Why don't I go over here to... this seems like a good follow-up, and I don't know if this is exactly what I had in mind, but we'll see how it flows. From Religion Dispatches, from Frederick Clarkson, a name we've called a couple of times here on the show, somebody who, like Dave Neward, kind of occupies that niche of looking at that side of politics. Here, a piece in Religion Dispatches, when religious freedom means freedom for religious violence. What do you know? And they're melding with politics and religion. It doesn't take much to say, well, on the one hand, I have melded politics and religion, and on the other, violence and religion. Why don't I just put it all together, with the common denominator being religion, and turn it into political violence? Why not? Religious freedom has long been a rallying cry of the religious and political right. In recent years, it's been used to provide a rationale for exemptions from a variety of civil rights laws. But at least since January 6th, some MAGA sectors have been dropping much of the pretense of religious freedom, while they appear to openly prepare their audiences for vigilante violence and religious war. The messages aren't always consistent, but they are fairly consistently violent. This has been on vivid display on the Reawaken America tour. Don't know what it is, but it's linked here, which has been a kind of rolling campaign for revolt since the failed coup. Ooh, sounds bad. Led by former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Remember him? He's in trouble. The 15 rallies held since April of 2021 have each drawn thousands of attendees. Like Stop the Steal events, they tend to be foggy, distortion-infused affairs full of dire warnings of hidden evil and worse to come. There are at least 3 more planned for this year, one in Southern Virginia, one for Western New York, and the other for the Idaho Panhandle, border regions intended to draw the maximum number of attendees. Election, medical, and vaccine conspiracists, along with insurrection veterans like Flynn, Eric Trump, Sidney Powell, Mike Lindell, and Roger Stone, grab most of the media attention, but a disturbing religious dimension has received far less attention. That is, until November, when Flynn blurted out their broad intention at a San Antonio rally. You might remember this. If we are going to have one nation under God, which we must, we have to have one religion. One nation under God and one religion under God. That was pretty overt. But there's so much more. The Reawaken events are a revision and rebranding of health and freedom conferences, which in the spring of 2021 rallied opposition to COVID prevention measures such as masking, vaccinations, and closure of public spaces. By the summer, it had become the Reawaken America tour with the sponsorship of Charisma magazine publishing empire headed by Stephen Strang. The name Stephen Strang, I think, is fairly new to me. But remember, we mentioned Charisma magazine, yesterday? I think made it into the programming. All right. Let's see. What's up next? Words of the Prophet Walnau. Walnau. Who's that? Impresario and tour director Clay Clark introduced Lance Walnau as a prophet when he spoke at the event in Phoenix in January of 2022. Walnau is an important figure in the neo-charismatic New Apostolic Reformation, best known for his advocacy of the idea of Seven Mountains Dominionism, which is a vision of Christians gaining control over the main sectors of societal influence, namely religion, government, family, arts and entertainment. Oh, we should go through these. This is 7. Religion, 1. 2, government. 3, family. 4, arts and entertainment. I think this is the way it's being numbered. 5, business. 6, media. And 7, education. church offices in this movement are termed the fivefold ministry of that it would be apostle, prophet, pastor, teacher, and evangelist. So they have all terminology of their own. I now recognize a lot of this is turning up in a thread that appeared in the in my inbox here from Travis from back in his irreverent testimony days, but he's passed on this. He's still using the handle on Twitter, irreverent testimony, and let's see. Yeah, this he's tweeted me this long thread with lots of sub-threads to it that had a lot of, in fact, it was so complex and confusing that I didn't think I would really mention it on the air until I could unravel it a little bit. But I just want to point out that a lot of what got folded into that rather confusing thread is being laid out here. So maybe this will help us make sense of that thread later on. So where were we? Right. Remember the new names and organizations being mentioned here. Lance Wallnau, Stephen Strang, Charisma Magazine, the New Apostolic Reformation, that's a linked reference here, Seven Mountains Dominionism, and the Fivefold Ministry. Prophet Wallnau asked for a show of hands of how many had been to reawakening events before. The camera from the video doesn't show the crowd, but apparently many had, because he compared them to Deadheads, the Grateful Dead fans. Wallnau says this movement is going to pick every deception Satan is working on in the United States, a movement that is going to hammer like David on the head of Goliath until the giant comes down. Sure, why not? Having just compared them to Deadheads, he advises, you are not part of something that's just a strange, eccentric gathering of conspiracy theorists. You are actually a prophetic community, and a populist movement is going to be raised up in the United States that is going to become the Great Awakening. It's the Spirit of God that has been on you your whole life, he declares, preparing you for this moment in history. Makes it sound very exciting and like maybe even almost legitimate. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with this fascinating examination of the intersection of religion and political violence. Who would have thunk it when we first began? Well, when we first began this article, you knew by now. So what was it? Oh, yes, I love the way evangelicals speak. They have their own syntax, which I don't know whether it's intentional or it's just, I just said this garbled thing and we're just going to adopt it as terminology. What did they say? Oh, yes, it's the Spirit of God that has been on you your whole life. The Spirit of God is on you. In you? Upon you? On you. Just splat, landed on you. And there you have it. Okay. Wallnau is just one of many who foresee violence because he's a prophet. So there you go. Last year, another prophet. I guess everybody can become a prophet in this. Prophet Amanda Grace, whoever that is, for example, blew a shofar to open a reawakening event, explaining, I love appropriating culture, I guess, apparently. Explaining, when the shofar was blown, the walls of Jericho fell. When the shofar was blown, Gideon and an army of 300 men defeated over 147,000 Midianites. It's an announcement to the enemy that this stronghold is about to fall. Demons tremble at the sound of the shofar. Who even knew? I mean, sure, why not? But they sure do love their Old Testament when it serves their purpose. And then, of course, you bring up other parts of the Old Testament and they say, no, it doesn't matter. It's old anyway. The New Testament is where it's at. But, when it comes to political violence, sometimes you need the Old Testament, I guess. She said, the shofar is a weapon of our warfare, and when we blow it, the power of God comes full force into that situation. That is a rude appropriation, really, if you ask me. But anyway, Flynn said the tour is about saving the country from tyranny, dictatorship, and communism. That, of course, all familiar stuff. To do this, he has identified the tour's 3 themes: election integrity, this COVID craziness that we're having shoved down our throats, and religious freedom. Oh yeah, that's why I'm here. I like the religious thing, so good, bringing me into the circle. In an interview with Apostle Stephen Strang, Flynn named 3 ministers who would speak to religious freedom. So I clicked on the sample video for each on the tour website to see what they said. So, what do we got here? Apostle Leon Benjamin, and what a great thing. Not only does it tell you you're right about everything and your religious interest has brought you here, and it's been on, God's Spirit been on you the whole life, and what he really meant for you to do was to back our efforts to raise money to get guns and, gloves to people who want to punch Democrats. I don't know if I really realized that. But not only that, but if you've been ostracized from every other movement, this is the way the libertarians used to organize, right? The people would join the Libertarian Party because you could instantly become a local Libertarian Party leader, even though no one would elect you a Republican Party leader in your area. So you just form your own thing. And here you get to just say, well, no one will listen to me, but if I, do enough in this movement, they'll call me apostle or prophet. How do you be, what's it like? How do you become a prophet in the days of old? Well, God's not speaking to me, but what if I just, pay enough money to this organization to name me prophet? Or apostle, for that matter. Here's Apostle Leon Benjamin of Richmond, Virginia, who said nothing about religious freedom in his sample video. Pastor Jackson Lahmer, Lahmeyer, of Tulsa, Oklahoma, also said nothing about religious freedom, except to claim the First Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees me and my church the right to gather together in person, virus or no virus. Maybe, maybe not. But religious freedom is about a lot more than temporary closings during a pandemic. The third, Bill Cook of Haymarket, Virginia, Virginia's got more than its share here, seems to favor the elimination of religious freedom. How do you like that? Wow, so? What does he mean by that? Well, he is the founder of the Black Robe Regiment. Sure, I'm a regiment now. The Black Robe Regiment, named after what the British Army called certain clergy during the American Revolution. I could go on with stories, he says, regarding the role of the clergy, but they were not preaching separation of church and state. I can tell you that. So, okay, the elimination of religious freedom in the sense that it's eliminated for everyone else. I need the religious freedom to eliminate your religious freedom. He blames separation of church and state for the mess we are in. He apparently either doesn't know or doesn't care that church-state separation was how the framers of the Constitution sought to protect religious freedom from the undue influence of the government and powerful religious institutions. Our enemies, he also claims, without naming them, have the intention of slaying everyone who believes in Christ. Sure. They are planning genocide. That's what we are seeing in COVID-19. So we have to fight. Can you imagine this guy? Now I'm going to get in trouble with YouTube again because I'm reading a wacko talking about how he doesn't understand how anything works. And neither does YouTube, generally speaking. And some of us, he says, are going to have to give our lives more of the same sort of highfalutin rhetoric. Next up, Jezebel churches. If you think you're safe because you're a religious person. No, you belong to a Jezebel church, don't you see? Some spoke of violence that was arguably even worse. Pastor Greg Locke, a militant tent revivalist from Tennessee, spoke in September 2021 in Colorado Springs. Go back to Tennessee, you bum. He didn't discuss religious freedom, but he denounced governmental tyranny and declared war in response to public policies that required churches to close, along with other public spaces at the height of the pandemic. I said, they'll be serving Frosties in the lake of fire before Pastor Greg Locke ever shuts down his local New Testament church because a demon-possessed, buck-wild, tyrannical government told him to. Yes, blow them shofars. This means war. This is our battle cry. Get my shofar back, goddammit. Church, stop being asleep. He denounced as Jezebel churches those that had closed to the public because of COVID. He's referring, of course, to the biblical figure of Jezebel, described here as a queen of ancient Israel whose story does not end well. She lures Jews away from their God and over to the Baal cult before she's deposed by a military leader, Jehu, who has thrown her out of her palace window to the streets where wild dogs eat her body. My goodness, that is a poor ending for her, isn't it? Next up, down with the Washington Monument. What? Why? Prophet Julie Green, that's why, who campaigns with Pennsylvania gubernatorial candidate, I don't know why I add Senate to that, but he'll probably be a Senate candidate after he loses the governor's race. Doug Mastriano, who's been in our eye for some time here. Well, she's also a frequent guest on the broadcast of tour regular Pastor Dave Scarlett. She says God has given her word of something dire. Oh, no, wait. God has given her word of something dire. Oh, I can't believe it. And that was a shofar, by the way, not a trombone. How do you like that? In a show broadcast from the Salem, Oregon Reawakening event in April, she told Scarlett, who did not give a damn, and fellow prophet Amanda Grace that the nation's capital is not what God wanted, and that he intends to destroy Washington, D.C. Wow. She says that God is moving the capital to either Pennsylvania, sure, or Florida. Of course, those would be the two places that it would move. This comes amidst some kind of sweeping away of existing institutions, out of which America will be reborn. And by the way, I mean, it could be anything, right? Whether it happens or not, I mean, they can just move the goalposts. But if it were to be like an environmental disaster, if there was a straight up, obviously environmental disaster caused by climate change, particularly that did something that they had, maybe kind of sort of almost predicted. I don't know, major flooding in Washington, D.C., something like that. And, I mean, so count on this, right? When it becomes totally obvious, that should be totally obvious to everyone, look, global warming is real and it's doing these things. Climate change is real and it's doing these things. They'll just say, no, this is the prophecy I was talking about. I'm right because of the thing that you predicted because of science. I predicted it because magic and God or some combination of something approaching God anyway, and I made it up and I'm right and you're wrong. So, even evidence of exactly what environmentalists have been talking about won't convince any of these guys. So where else were we? Let's see. The panel also discussed the need to remove monuments. This was rather surprising and new, that are not of God. And what are they? Pretty much anything we say. Amanda Grace says the Statue of Liberty needs to come down because it's tied to a false god and is part of the old order. Scarlett, again, who doesn't give a damn, thinks it's tied to Islam. Yes, right. Everyone knows that the Statue of Liberty is Muslim. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, among their crowd, people claim to understand it, but I guess it's sort of an interesting thing. Could you undo them with this? I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, Gavin McInnes made a name for himself saying, yeah, political violence is great. Everybody should beat up people I don't like, and it seemed to work out just fine for him. And here, you'd think, well, what if we expose to America that these guys say things like, yeah, we should destroy the Statue of Liberty because it's really Muslim. Okay. I don't know. We'll see what it does. Green says, which one was this one? Julie Green. Prophet Julie Green says, any monument that was erected by them that he didn't want will be torn down. How do we know? Julie Green will tell you. Incidentally, according to Green, God also mentioned the Washington Monument and then all the arches of Baal, which I don't know what. Is Washington Monument an arch? No, I don't know. Noting that the Washington Monument is modeled on ancient Egyptian obelisks, Green adds, it's not like they make anything new, they just take it from something before, like the shofar that they took from us. That's why God said, these are like the pharaohs of old. It's the same demonic thing that's behind the leaders now as they were back there with the pharaohs. I don't know that there's ever any allegation that the pharaohs were demonically influenced. Bad people? Yes. Demonic influence? I don't remember it. Maybe it's in the detail. That's not in the children's book version of the... I don't know. There are people we could ask, but it's not evident here. Anyway, any monuments that are not really of God... I'm sorry. The ones who are really of God. Gosh, I've got it back. Any monuments that are really of God can stay. That's lucky for them, isn't it? The ones that are not of God will be destroyed, and nothing can stop that. Just a little Taliban action for you there. They don't mention whether these things will be acts of God alone or in consort with his people, but they seem certain it will happen in the coming months. And I think they mean in consort with the people when they plant bombs there. But they were inspired to do so by God. So, like I said, a little Taliban action, like blowing up those Buddhas in the mountains. And they can blow up anything and just say, I heard from God that the Washington Monument was a demonic thing and it's not of God. Who says? God told me. Now, it should be a very interesting couple of months or years or however long these people last. It's a little worrisome. All right, let's see. Why not one or two more things? Well, who knows? Because we'll be running out of time at some point. But at which point, hopefully, we can get out of the way for Joan arriving. It occurred to me yesterday as I was writing the Morning Post how early it really is in Pacific time, and how difficult it is to imagine having to lose that hour and getting up at 7:30. It's not super early, and thankfully it's something you can do from home, but. You can see now why things get hectic on certain days, and it's a terrible time to have to do it. So I appreciate any time that she's able to actually make it and give us that time. All right, let's see. Why not throw in this thing? I think we might be able to read this one before our break and comment on it a little bit, maybe even give us a little extra space on the other side of it. Jamel Bowie, writing a opinion piece for the New York Times, just reminding everybody, I think we've been over this ground, but I thought Jamel does these things so well. Next time Trump tries to steal an election, he won't need a mob. I think by now we know that that's the case, and pretty much the mechanics of how he would do it and what this means. But I thought, why not let Jamel lay things out? It's a good day, a hearing coming up. Good thing to have in the back of your mind. Last week, this is a piece from, what's the date on this one? July 8th. So I guess earlier or later last week, so 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court announced it would hear arguments in Moore v. Harper, the challenge to North Carolina's new congressional map. And we went over that in some detail last week. The long and short of the case is that North Carolina Republicans proposed a gerrymander so egregious that the state Supreme Court ruled that it violated the state's constitution. You remember all this one, the surgical precision and everything. Republicans sought to restore the legislative map, citing the independent state legislature doctrine, which asserts that state legislatures have almost absolute power to set their own rules for federal elections. Once passed into law, then, those rules cannot be overturned or even reviewed by state courts. Just as the founders intended, of course. No judicial review, no state powers of any kind. What do you know? A Republican victory at the Supreme Court would, according to the election law expert Rick Hasen, radically alter the power of state courts to rein in state legislatures that violate voting rights in federal elections. It would essentially neuter the ability of state courts to protect voters under provisions of state constitutions against infringement of their rights. This radical interpretation of the Elections Clause of the federal Constitution also extends to the Presidential Electors Clause, such that during a presidential election year, state legislatures could allocate electoral college votes in any way they see fit at any point in the process. As I argued earlier this year, we could see Republican-led states pass laws that would allow them to send alternative slates of electors, overruling the will of the voters and doing legally what Donald Trump and his conspirators pressured Republicans in Arizona and Georgia to do illegally. And remember what I've told you all along about Brad Raffensperger. I think he would gladly have done Trump's bidding if he thought he had a legal path to doing so. And thanks to the Georgia legislature, they have created that legal path. Under the independent state legislature doctrine, the next time Trump tries to overturn the results of an election he lost, he won't need a mob. There are many problems with this doctrine beyond the outcomes it was engineered to produce. Some are logical, as though that would matter. The theory seems to suggest that state legislatures are somehow separate and apart from state constitutions, and some are historical, and that one does present a particular problem, the logical one. State legislatures are somehow separate and apart from state constitutions, which created them, which is kind of weird and maybe does pose a bit of a problem. Some are historical, and among the historical problems is the fact that Americans have never really wanted to entrust their state legislatures with the kind of sweeping electoral powers that this theory would confer. For most of the first 50 years of presidential elections, there was no uniform method of the allocation of electors. In the first truly competitive race for president, the election of 1800, 2 states used a winner-take-all system, where voters cast ballots to pick their electors directly. 3 states used a system where electors were chosen on a district-by-district basis. 10 states used a system where the legislature simply chose the electors. And 1 state, Tennessee, used a combination of methods. Methods changed from election to election depending on the partisan advantage. Virginia moved from the district system in 1796 to the winner-take-all general ticket in 1800 to ensure total support for Thomas Jefferson in his contest against John Adams. In retaliation, Adams's home state of Massachusetts abandoned district elections for legislative selection, ensuring that he would get all of Massachusetts' electors. This kind of manipulation continued until the mid-1830s, when every state, save South Carolina, adopted the general ticket. South Carolina, by the way, would not allow voters to directly choose electors until after the Civil War. Beginning in 1812, however, you can start to see the public and its elected officials turn against this use of state legislative power. Jefferson's Democratic-Republican Party was still in power. James Madison, his longtime friend and political ally, was president, but he and the war he was now fighting were unpopular. Most members of Congress had backed Madison's call for war with Britain, but it was a partisan vote, with most Republicans in favor and every Federalist opposed. The reasons for war were straightforward. The conduct of her government, said Madison in his message to Congress requesting a declaration of war, presents a series of hostile acts hostile to the United States as an independent and neutral nation. Among those acts were the impressment, as they called it, of American seamen. Thousands of American citizens, under the safeguard of public law and of their national flag, have been torn from their country. And attacks on American commerce. British cruisers have been in the practice also of violating the rights and peace of our coasts, as Madison put it. In fighting Britain, the administration and its allies hoped to pressure the Crown into a more favorable settlement on these maritime issues. They also hoped to conquer Canada and shatter British influence in the parts of North America where it allied with native tribes to harass American settlers and stymie American expansion. Those hopes crashed into reality, however, as an untrained and inexperienced American militia flailed against British regulars. And as the summer wore on, bringing him closer and closer to the next presidential election, Madison faced defeat abroad and division at home. In New England, especially, his Federalist opponents used their hold on local and state offices to obstruct the war effort. In Hartford, writes the historian Donald Hickey in The War of 1812, A Forgotten Conflict, Federalists sought to end loud demonstrations by army recruiters. by adopting a pair of city ordinances that restricted public music and parades. It was pretty targeted. In Boston, the Massachusetts legislature threatened to sequester federal tax money if militia arms due to the state under an 1808 law were not delivered. Fearing defeat in the presidential race, and as a result of this anger and discontent over the war, Republicans did everything they could to secure Madison's victory. The historian Alexander Caesar details these shenanigans in the book, Why Do We Still Have the Electoral College? It's a good title. He notes, in North Carolina, which had utilized the district system since 1796, the legislature announced that it would choose electors by itself. Its majority feared that Madison might lose the state to DeWitt Clinton, who ran with the support of both Federalists and dissident Republicans. On the other side, the Federalist legislature in New Jersey announced just days before the election that it was canceling the scheduled balloting and appointing electors of its own. And in Massachusetts, the Republican-led Senate and Federalist-led lower house could not agree on a method for choosing electors. In the end, notes Caesar, an extra legislative session had to be convened to save the state from losing its electoral votes altogether. Madison was reelected, but according to Caesar, the attempts on both sides to manipulate the outcome ignited firestorms of protest and recrimination. A number of lawmakers would try, in the immediate aftermath and the years that followed, to amend the Constitution to end legislative selection of electors and mandate district-based elections for the Electoral College. District elections, according to one supportive congressman, were best because they fit the maxim that all legitimate power is derived from the people, and because they would reduce the chance that a man may be elected to the first office in the nation by a minority of votes of the people. Oh, look out for that, right? This concern for democracy, or popular government, as they called it, was a big part of the case for reform. For Senators Malon Dickerson of New Jersey, allowing legislators to choose electors without giving voters a say was the worst possible system, as it usurped power from the people and departed from the spirit, if not the letter, of the law of the Constitution. Okay, I inserted law into that one, but the letter, spirit, if not the letter, of the Constitution. I thought that was interesting, though, that, are we talking about Senator Malon Dickerson of New Jersey, a federal senator or a state senator? I don't know, but it occurs to me that how ironic it was for a federal senator to say that allowing legislators to choose electors without giving the voters a say is the worst possible system, given that at the time, if he was a senator, he would have been selected to the Senate by the legislature. This very same process that he thought was illegitimate had made him a senator. I just thought that was unusual. Even at this early juncture in our nation's history, many Americans believed in democratic participation and sought to make the institutions of the republic more receptive to the voice of the people. One supporter of district elections, Representative James Strudwick Smith of North Carolina, put it simply: you will bring the election near to the people, and consequently you will make them place more value on the elective franchise, which is all important in a Republican form of government. There is a somewhat common view that the counter-majoritarianism of the American system is acceptable because the United States is, you've heard this before, a republic, not a democracy. We're tired of that one, but that notion lurks behind the idea of the independent state legislature, which would empower partisans to limit the right of the people to choose their leaders in a direct and democratic manner. But from the start, Americans have rejected the idea that their system is somehow opposed to more and greater democracy. When institutions seemed to subvert democratic practice, the voters and their representatives pushed back, demanding a government more responsive to their interests, desires, and Republican, small r, aspirations. It is not for nothing that the men who claimed Jefferson as their political and ideological forefather labeled their party the Democracy, later, of course, the Democratic Party. As Americans recognized them, and as they should recognize, as Americans recognized then, rather, And as they should recognize now, the Constitution is not a charter for states or state legislatures. It is a charter for people, for our rights, and for our right to self-government. That is actually the end of the piece, and a strong ending at that. Took a different direction than I really thought it was going to do, but a great historical lesson. But that last bit there, Americans recognize then and should recognize now, the Constitution is not a charter for states or state legislatures. It is entirely about, or almost entirely, about guaranteeing individual rights as against the government. And of course, it's weird that Republicans want to use it very often to take away rights from individuals. There is, of course, some reservation of rights to the states, but only sort of a general warrant to the states in the form of the 10th Amendment. But still, even so, here, this is not, it's a hard thing to do, to interpret the Constitution as bestowing rights on state legislators. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on then. I don't know what to expect. It's whenever we have a week off and then come back into the regular routine, it always causes problems because you feel out of step with the routine. And minus an hour and making it 7:30 in the morning in Joan's latest locale, her new home. She moved to Portland, right? Yeah, okay. Well, I think I got that right. I don't think I remember it correctly. Like I said, I could see 7:30 becoming an issue for her. I mean, I don't know whether she's really an early riser. And as they say, early to bed, early to rise. They said makes men healthy, wealthy, and wise. That was Ben Franklin speaking, of course. And I think he might revise that one at this point to be a little bit more inclusive. We'll do our part in getting her to be early to rise. We haven't done much in the way of making her wealthy, though. But, hey, the wisdom part is beyond a doubt. So we at least have that going for us, which is nice. And, quite honestly, it's not without wisdom to say 7:30 is a little too early to do these things. But it's always going to be 7:30. That's the latest half-hour block that we've got. So I'm a little sorry that I ever set her up for this thing, just only because, I wouldn't want somebody to commit me to a 7:30 thing once a week either. But, all right, well, we'll see how it goes and take what we can get at this point. Any rate, lots to discuss, and I want to reiterate that last point that Jamel Bouie made at the exit from his piece. So I don't know if I was up against the time limit and not sure that I really mentioned that and made it clear. But yeah, the whole, pretty much the entirety of the Constitution is really about the limitation of the Bill of Rights, obviously, is, guaranteeing of rights to individuals as against the government. And that was, it should be pointed out, an afterthought. But the body of the Constitution itself was, of course, about the structure of government, but the limitations of the federal government, what it could and couldn't do, with state governments impacted kind of as little as possible. They really didn't want to screw around with it too much. But the idea that there was this overwhelming, or this broad sweeping power granted to state legislatures in particular, right? That's the whole independent state legislature theory, is that state legislatures, rather than states themselves as bodies or whatever they might be, or state governors or state courts, are the ones that are supposed to have the power with respect to regulating federal elections within their borders. I mean, it is possible. You could design things that way. It just seems odd that you would do so without ever using those words. But there you have it. But again, just some weird gray area between what is a state and a state legislature and state other things. Like, for instance, I don't know, I'm brought back to U.S. history class when it was emphasized that the ratification of the Constitution had its own process, and that they refused to leave it to state legislatures to be the ones to ratify the Constitution, which is odd because now when we ratify amendments to the Constitution, we accept their ratification by the action of state legislatures. But originally, for the adoption of the Constitution, we did not. And, well, that was a workaround, of course. But like you might remember that the Constitution had to be approved by state constitutional conventions. It's a federal constitution, but the state would get together in some body other than the legislature to approve of these things. And it might have been the case that a lot of times there was overlap because they were just, the best known political operators in the state were likely to be in the state legislature at the time, and they could get themselves elected to the Constitutional Convention. But I don't know. Maybe there wasn't a whole lot of overlap because remember that the Constitution was replacing the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation gave enormous power to ruin everything, really, to the state legislatures. But again, the states acting as states, but acting through their legislature. They have to act through some kind of representative body, I guess. But it was interesting that they chose to ratify the Constitution with separate assemblies because, of course, the other assemblies, presumably they figured, owed their allegiances to the Articles of Confederation because it was the Articles of Confederation that gave you, as a state legislator, the most power in running the federal government. So maybe it might not have been ratified had the decision been left up to them. But for whatever reason, the legitimacy of the Constitution originally was seen as coming from separate assemblies elected entirely for the purpose of considering the document rather than considering the political implications to themselves of this new document. But it's interesting that like I said, that now when we ratify amendments to the Constitution, we don't demand that there be a constitutional convention in each state to ratify it. We say, the legislature can speak for you. And it seems like sort of an afterthought, a practical matter, perhaps, but not something that was necessarily, it is envisioned in the framing, and that's the process, right? What language do they use? This would be in is it in Article 5, the amendment process? I'm going to walk away here move away from the microphone while I look. I've lost my little handbook constitutions. I don't know what happened to them. And every time I look around for them, and occasionally I find them and I say, I'm going to put them in a place where I can remember next time where they are. And it might be easier to just do this via Google now that I'm thinking about it. We'll tap this out. Constitution's Article 5. I'm just kind of curious. Was it 5? Let's see. Yeah, on application of 2/3 of the legislatures of the several states. Let's see, that's for the Constitutional Convention. And then, let's see, so that's convention, but is this, yeah. Okay, and let's see. As part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, and by the by conventions of 3/4 thereof. So they give you two options. So it's interesting that they even bother to give you that option when it comes to amendments, as opposed to insisting on new constitutional assemblies. If not, well, I guess you don't want to confuse people with a constitutional convention to reconsider the whole thing. But at any rate, it's just interesting that they give legislatures that power just as a matter of convenience, rather than having to elect the whole new body to consider every constitutional amendment, which I guess they probably thought there would be more of, rather than so few. But at any rate, I just thought that was an interesting way of ending the Jamel Bowie piece, that the independent state legislature theory requires that you, for these purposes, just shift your view of what the Constitution is at its heart and generally, and say what it really is a charter for empowering state legislatures, which it really just didn't seem to be the case ever in any other instance, any other interpretation of the Constitution for any other reason, except for this one, where they need it to be the case. But okay. Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting and a good way of winding things up, and something good to have on hand as we consider today's January 6th hearing and what's coming up. All right, let's see. Couple other things. Why not share a few of these other things that are related to the January 6th hearings? Something I put aside a couple of days ago, also of some interest in the Philly Inquirer. Are you going to let us get through all this? Yes. From Will Bunch, who, in reflecting on Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, had said, Cassidy Hutchinson and the coup's great mystery. What if Trump went to the Capitol? I've been pondering that and did so a couple of weeks ago, right after her testimony, and just thinking about the weirdness of a sitting president showing up at the Capitol demanding entry into the Capitol. Would the cops have gotten out of his way? Would they have viewed their own mission as having shifted from protecting the building to protecting the president, even though the president was there to undo their protection of the building? Some very weird, gray area constitutional questions there. But I don't know if that's what he's asking about in his piece. But before I even get into it, I will note for the record, Patsy Baloney, having given his behind closed doors testimony taped the other day, there was some reporting about and some discussion of what did he testify to, and did he contradict Cassidy Hutchinson in some way. It's hard to tell because there's a spin war going on. The Washington Examiner, the right-wing Washington Examiner, went with a headline designed to make it look like Patsy Baloney had said Cassidy Hutchinson was wrong or lying, even though that wasn't necessarily the case. And then some other mainstream, and I guess you could say even left-leaning mainstream publications were more along the lines of, no, really the reports are that nothing that Patsy Baloney said contradicted anything that Cassidy Hutchinson said. Then in the middle there were some comments from, attributed, I think, to Zoe Lofgren, who said, keep in mind here, Patsy, Pat Cipollone, the real name, has not been invited here to testify to corroborate what Cassidy Hutchinson said or to deny what Cassidy Hutchinson said. We're not calling witnesses for backup here. We want to know what his perspective was and what he experienced. We have some very specific questions for him. It's not about checking on Cassidy Hutchinson's story. That's not the design of bringing him in. So headlines to the effect of, well, he did or didn't corroborate what she said, are missing the forest for the trees in that sense. Anyway, now over to Will Bunch and his piece, speculating on what would have happened had Trump made his way to the Capitol. And this is an interesting historical background piece too. This offers a little bit of it, I think. I see in the subheader. but also there's more from Greg Sargent, who's picked up on this theme, and a couple other writers who have discussed the historical importance of Mussolini's March on Rome, which I wasn't terribly familiar with, and comparing it to, well, might that have been the model for Trump's interest in getting to the Capitol? And I would say yes, except for the fact that he's so lazy and such a lout that if it were really part of his plan, if he really understood what Mussolini had engineered and gained from executing his plan, I don't know what would have kept him on the couch. So it might just be an afterthought that people thought, well, this presented the danger of Mussolini's March on Rome, but to a dummy who's too lazy to use it, it's not worth that much. Anyway, let's see. Cassidy Hutchinson and the coup's great mystery, what if Trump went to the Capitol? A White House aide's stunning testimony proves Donald Trump was eager to recreate Mussolini's March on Rome and raises a lot of what-ifs. This all the way back at the end of June 30th, from Will Bunch, but I thought I would bring it up today because why not? More hearings. The nation's right wing, swelled by disgruntled military veterans and those with a penchant for violence, had grown increasingly restless that fall, with occasional street clashes between these reactionaries and anti-fascists on the left. Finally, the leader of the right bloc, a big man who strutted on stage, sometimes buffoonishly, massed his followers and urged them to march on the Capitol and fight for their country, even though in the end he didn't march with them. Sounds familiar, right? Instead, whoop, record scratch, Benito Mussolini would get in a car and drive to Rome in October 1922. Yes, it's the exact same situation, where he again met up with the throng of as many as 60,000 who'd marched there, that's more than we had, after the future dictator's speech to them in Naples. This was the now notorious March on Rome, and the intimidation of Italy's ruling elites by this large angry mob and its strongman leader worked beyond anyone's wildest dreams. By month's end, King Victor Emmanuel III had ceded all political power to Mussolini and the fascists, who would not relinquish it for 2 decades. Just 4 months before the 100th anniversary of what is now seen as the liftoff of modern fascism, we have seen in dramatic fashion how the concept and underlying terror tactics of Mussolini's March on Rome never went away, but lived on to be modernized by a reality TV star who'd faked his way into the White House and was determined to stay there. Last Tuesdays, or whenever it was, riveting testimony before the January 6th committee by former Donald Trump White House insider Cassidy Hutchinson, an afternoon that will be long remembered by historians and political fanatics, just as those hot June days when John Dean blew the whistle on Richard Nixon in 1973 revealed just how close Trump came to a true Mussolini moment, his own plan to march on the U.S. Capitol. The now 26-year-old Hutchinson, deputy to Trump's chief of staff Mark Meadows, embedded in the then-president's inner circle in January 6, 2021, testified under oath that Trump knew that his supporters were heavily armed when he exhorted them to march from a rally near the White House to the Capitol, where the ceremony to certify President Biden's win was beginning. In the most explosive testimony, the import of which has been verified by the U.S. Secret Service, even as some of the salacious details were disputed, Hutchinson confirmed prior suggestions that the 45th president had demanded to go to the Capitol, where he would have stood among Proud Boys and others launching a violent assault on democracy. "I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol right now," Trump is said to have bellowed at the head of his security detail, as Hutchinson said was related to her that afternoon by Secret Service-connected Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato in the presence of the security head, Robert Engel. But the president was overruled by aides who insisted his security could not be guaranteed at or near the wild and increasingly violent melee. To experts on authoritarianism, who've been some of the most reliable tour guides during the long, strange trip of America's last 7 years, Trump's scheme was an effort to create a legend, reassert his leadership, and reverse his embarrassment over losing the election to Biden by 7 million votes. As Hutchinson was testifying, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, the New York University historian who'd specialized in Mussolini and wrote the book Strong Men, tweeted that, quote, "Of course Trump was trying to get to the Capitol. A coup leader must be there to bless the new order birthed by violence and be acclaimed as savior of the crowd, or by the crowd." I reached out to Ben-Ghiat to follow up on this. She told me that January 6th was essentially a cult leader rescue operation in which Trump prepped his followers for months to be outraged at their hero being robbed of what was rightfully his, and then summoned them to the Capitol to save America by saving him. She had written recently that the moment Trump hoped to achieve, restoring his movement's warped sense of justice and order, is what is known as the pronunciamiento. I guess borrowing from Italian there. June 28th, 2022 was a devastating day for Donald Trump, for whatever remains of his tattered legacy, and possibly even for his schemes to return to the White House in 2025. Over just a couple of hours, Hutchinson laid out a compelling case that Trump and his closest aides knew the potential for violence on January 6th and knew that morning of dangerous weapons, yet still sought mayhem at the Capitol when the votes were to be counted. She showed how Trump not only had no real interest in calling off the insurrectionists, but supported their chance to hang Mike Pence. Most aides, she testified, knew what they were doing was against the law, either from their in-house legal advice or the pathetic last-minute begging for pardons. But like most political bombshells, the aftermath raised two big questions: what if and what next? What if the Secret Service and other aides had indeed kowtowed to the expletive-deleted president and driven him to the Capitol? How might that have changed the course of the attempted and ultimately failed coup that was underway? It certainly would have complicated matters. First of all, the focus of the already overwhelmed security forces on Capitol Hill would have shifted dramatically with Trump's arrival, so that the unprecedented scenario of protecting the commander-in-chief in the midst of an active riot would have taken priority, presumably, over the effort to protect the Capitol. Yes, that's what I think. If Trump had been able to speak to the angry mob as intended, it might have riled them up further and encouraged more of the thousands in the Capitol grounds to enter the building. In other words, Trump's physical presence could have intensified the violence, prolonged it, and created a scenario where it would have taken police and ultimately troops longer and with much more difficulty to clear the Capitol and retake the building. And if that had happened, it might have been unsafe for Vice President Mike Pence and Congress to resume Biden's certification. Trump might have declared a national emergency that the worst of his advisors had been urging. Simply put, Hutchinson's testimony showed how close Trump's attempted coup came to being a successful coup, at least for a time during January of 2021. This scenario joins the other what-ifs. What if Pence had buckled to the pressure to support the election schemes? Or if leftist protesters had come to Washington for the kind of street fighting that might have seen the National Guard adopt a pro-Trump posture that paint a damning picture of how close the American experiment came to bursting into flames. Which is why the what next is so important. Just how exactly will the slow-moving Justice Department of Attorney General Merrick Garland respond to the increasingly mapped-out-for-them case that Trump, his lawyers, Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman, and others, took part in a criminal conspiracy in fomenting the insurrection? The magic 8-ball is very cloudy. On one hand, a spate of FBI and other law enforcement subpoenas and even raids against Eastman, Trump's Justice Department ally Jeffrey Clark, and so-called fake electors in key battleground states suggest that Team Garland is finally responding to the hearings and growing public support for accountability. On the other hand, the New York Times reported Thursday, and this was a little while ago, that top prosecutors were stunned by Hutchinson's testimony, raising questions about how serious the probe really is. there are understandable reasons to fear indicting Trump, which would surely heighten the partisan divisions in America, with those on the right howling that this is all a distraction from inflation and Biden's low approval rating. In the political trial of the century, how could there be an impartial jury? But recent events, from political violence to a rogue Supreme Court that was molded by Trump, suggest that unrest is happening no matter what. The real pressure is not to keep a false calm, but to do the right thing, with the future of America on the line. Donald Trump must be brought to justice, concludes Will Bunch. Hey, I like to agree with that. Let's see, a few other things that we might perhaps want to add to the mix here. Let's see. First of all, I guess, was this news from The Guardian of yet another film documentarian working here? Or is this the same one? I can't recall whether... Did we read this one and not remove it from the queue? Film offers inside look at Roger Stone's Stop the Steal efforts before January 6th. Footage shows key moments of planning with fellow activist Ali Alexander to overturn election results in Trump's favor. Hugo Lowell reporting for The Guardian back on last Friday, July 8th. Weeks before the Capitol attack, top Republican political activists Roger Stone and Ali Alexander identified the January 6th congressional certification as the final chance for Donald Trump to attempt to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. The focus on the congressional certification, according to sources familiar with the matter, was one of several areas they marked as potential flashpoints to exploit as leaders of the Stop the Steal movement to help Trump reverse his defeat to Joe Biden. As Stone and Alexander mounted their political operation, their activities were recorded by two conservative filmmakers in the post-2020 election period and in the weeks before January 6th. Once again, these guys thought they were making, Triumph of the Will 2, and it ends up being evidence at their trials instead. The access meant the filmmakers Jason Rink and Paul Escandon, new to me, captured footage of the leaders of the Stop the Steal movement and their interactions with top Trump allies, according to a teaser for the documentary titled The Steal. In following Stop the Steal, the filmmakers' project documented key moments in the timeline leading up to the Capitol attack, including an occupation of the Georgia state capitol in November and rallies in Washington that almost seemed like dry runs for January 6th. They also caught on camera public and private moments at the Stop the Steal events. Among others who appear in the documentary are the House Republican Paul Gosar, former Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani, and Trump's former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, the spy. At one point, the footage reviewed by The Guardian shows Alexander appears to presage the flashpoint that would be January 6th, saying of Biden, the House and Senate must certify the Electoral College. There is no president-elect until the Electoral College meets. But they actually met on December 14th, but okay, that's not what he means. Taken together, the footage gives an inside look at the efforts of the Stop the Steal leaders, notably Alexander, who was something of a protege to Stone, Trump's longest-serving advisor, to somehow stop Biden from becoming president. Stone also allowed himself to be filmed by a Danish documentary film crew that recorded his activities in his room at the Willard Hotel as the Capitol attack unfolded. The Washington Post reported earlier this year. The House January 6th Select Committee emailed a letter earlier in January asking to review the footage, but a lawyer for Rink declined the request, citing the need to maintain journalistic independence and fears that the content would leak from the inquiry. House investigators did not ultimately pursue the matter after the lawyer indicated that he would litigate a subpoena. Unless filmmakers have said they would only turn over footage in response to a subpoena, the panel has generally avoided that route. A spokesman for the Select Committee declined to comment on if that position has changed. The question about the footage, however, recently resurfaced inside the Select Committee, days after former Trump aide Cassidy Hutchinson testified under oath that Trump ordered his then chief of staff to call Stone on the night before the Capitol attack. Stone has denied that the call took place, just as he denied that he had anything to do with the events of January 6th. He declined to cooperate with the Select Committee in an interview, asserting his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. A little late in starting our outro music here, but let's see what we can sum up. Any claim, assertion, or implication that I knew about or was involved or condoned any illegal event on January 6th or any other date, categorically false. Sure. But while the full extent of what the filmmakers recorded remains unclear, parts of the footage reviewed by The Guardian make the Steele movie seem like a detailed account of behind-the-scenes efforts to stop Biden from becoming president. I wonder if they think they're doing the right wing a service with this film or not. It's hard to tell. The documentary presents an account of the Stop the Steal movement after the 2020 election and how its leaders descended on multiple states to advance discredited claims of election fraud. The activities of Stone with respect to stopping Biden's certification is of interest to January 6th investigators since he had close ties to the leaders of the far-right Proud Boys and Oath Keepers groups that stormed the Capitol and have since been indicted for seditious conspiracy and are, of course, the subject of today's hearings. So we'll see how these shake out, but we won't hear or have a chance to talk about it, I think, until Thursday when we're rejoined by Greg. And in the meantime now, of course, Justice Putnam will carry you through the next hour with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what he's got on tap, just sort of curious. New reporting on the weapons brought by the January 6th insurgents amplifies the severity of the attack. Good.
From Netroots
was hoping to hear about that one.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Walton.
As a matter of fact, it was one of the articles I was pondering trying to squeeze into today's show from the Washington Post. Evidence of firearms in the January 6th crowd grows as arrests and trials mount. Well, we'll hand it over to Justice Putnam to tell you about what happened there and so much more around the country and around the world. We'll see you again on